This plenary is preparing for the unexpected, so the outcomes of climate change. Preparing for the unexpected, are we ready for the next disaster? Coming up to the stage here is Sarah Thomas and Mitchell Dyck. They will be part of the presentation. Sarah Thomas is a BC Renal Project Manager and Chair of the Emergency Management Committee. She works to foster a culture of preparedness, engaging renal teams to anticipate and manage significant disruptive events, emergencies, and disasters. She has been the driving force behind the new hemodialysis emergency support team role and recently designed and conducted a provincial tabletop exercise where key partners carried out an emergency response exercise. Previously, Sarah was a clinical nurse leader and specialized in home hemodialysis, including special projects, patient and nursing education. With us also is Mitchell Dyck. He's one of our patient partners. He's a Red Seal welder. Mitchell was unexpectedly diagnosed with IgA nephropathy and spent 2 years on hemodialysis before receiving a transplanted kidney. His time on hemodialysis coincided with the flooding in the Fraser Valley in 2021. And so that's part of what's going to be talked about today. So I'm going to give it over to Sarah.
Thank you. Oh, thanks, Naomi. I'd also like to introduce Naomi, who everybody probably knows by the end of this conference. Naomi will be speaking as well. Naomi has been a renal nurse for over 15 years, and her interest in renal care started in hemodialysis, and then she transitioned to peritoneal dialysis. In the fall of 2021, as we remember the flooding in the Fraser Health area, Naomi really had to pivot the way she was teaching her patients in PD. And we had another patient partner who Naomi was training at that time who was going to be here with us to share her experience. However, she is recovering at home with a kidney transplant. So great news for her. So she could not be here today, but Naomi will share her experience. So thanks for being here. So there's no coincidence that this presentation sort of came after Dr. Stigant's. Climate emergencies is definitely something that we're seeing more and more of. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing here in BC. First, we have nothing to disclose, so we just would start with that. And then the objectives of today were really just, you've probably seen that in your program. We're just going to review a few things and share what we're doing here in British Columbia. So this might seem like a real silly question, but I'd love to see a poll. So if everyone wants to go to Slido, I just thought, let's get everyone engaged and moving. And so do you think climate emergencies are becoming more frequent? Yes, I just realized that. Thank you. Hey, 100%. Yeah. Oh, we got a no? Okay. It was a mic? Okay. So 99% of you feel that the climate emergencies are more frequent. And I would tend to agree with you. And I think this data will also show to you that climate emergencies are definitely increasing. We've started seeing a real increase since the late 1960s, early 70s, and we are now up to, close to 500 with dips. This is around the world. So that's one a day, sometimes two a day. So as you can see, we are definitely seeing more and more climate emergencies, and the data is definitely trending up. If we look at the disaster type in the last 52 years, you will see in blue that flooding is the biggest disaster around the world, definitely followed by extreme weather, which we've witnessed here in British Columbia, hurricanes, tornadoes, extreme weather. Earthquake is another, drought, which we're also seeing here, extreme temperature. These are all the things that I think all of us have been feeling. To continue with my downer information, I know this is a bit heavy and I apologize, but it does get better, I promise. This is the risk matrix for BC and where we really are and where our biggest risks are as far as climate emergencies and severe wildfire season, seasonal water shortage, and heat wave. I'm sure that's nothing new to you, but the next three, ocean acidification, glacier mass loss, and long-term water shortage are some of our long-term emergencies that I think Carolyn gave us some really great ways to prevent that from getting worse. So we are really looking at that and trying to prevent that. And then this year, you can see the amount of hectares that burned in Canada, and that is just from September. We have had, this was the worst wildfire season we've had. And I'm sure our colleagues here from Interior Health and Northern Health really felt that as well. And kudos to all of you who really came together and made sure our patients continued to be safe. So if stats and data is not your thing, I've got a little bit of a storybook. Since the last time we all met in 2019, if you remember COVID, I'm sure you do. That was the first thing that we all came together, and COVID was a really big emergency, which followed by Omicron, which that's when we saw a lot of our staffing be sick. We had a lot of nurses off sick, patients sick. We really saw things happen then. Then we had the heat dome. Oh, and it doesn't stop. Then we had the Lytton fires, which the town of Lytton went up in a matter of minutes. So that then followed by our flooding, atmospheric river. So 2021 was not a good year, as you can see. It was really sad and tragic. So we did have a bit of a reprieve until this summer, 2023. Not all of you may know about this, but we in BC were called to help evacuate the Northwest Territories. They were going to be they were planning to bring patients, dialysis patients down to British Columbia because Alberta was at capacity. In the end, those patients did end up going to Alberta. We did get 1 or 2 acute patients here, but it was quite, we had to organize this. This was not an easy feat, and we were prepared to be in standby. And if you heard from the news, YVR Airport ended up having a mini hospital in place, and the reserves brought patients down. So it was quite an organized system. But in the end, our renal patients did go to Alberta. And then the wildfires we had this summer. So I'm sure you're all feeling great right now. I'm sorry, I shared this with my family and they're like, this is a bit of a downer, Mom. And I get it. You know, you've probably heard the word climate anxiety. We are all feeling this. And so I'm gonna try to bring it back. So in a word cloud, maybe this isn't bringing it back, but what's one word that comes to mind when you think of a natural disaster? And we'll do the fancy word cloud thing, and let's just see what everyone thinks. Delays, tragedy, fear, worry, chaos, people, evacuation, nuts, delays, panic, planning, scary, worry. Sarah, oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That was really nice. Apocalypse, okay, wow. So I had a feeling this was not going to be a really uplifting word cloud, but to give you some hope, I chose the word resilient. In BC, we have been very resilient. I am so proud of the renal community and network. We have come together to support each other. We have always been there for each other, and we are so interconnected. And I just love that we have been there to support our colleagues and our patients and our families. So I'm going to use that word right now because it's a little bit more upbeat. So it's the capacity of being interconnected to cope with an event and recover successfully. So we've always recovered successfully. And as I mentioned, like, we should all be very proud of the work we do. We have all showed up. We have, so clap. We have all showed up. And I know you're tired. You're exhausted, and COVID took a toll on us, and then it just kept going. But so thank you. Thank you from all of us for being resilient and showing up. So I would like to shift gears now and talk about the lived experience of our two panel members here, Naomi and Mitchell. As you heard at the beginning, we did talk, Mitchell and Naomi had the lived experience through the floods in the Fraser Health Authority in the Abbotsford and Chilliwack area. And I'm going to pass it over to Mitchell to talk a little bit about his experience. I don't know, do you have the mic? So Mitchell, could you just introduce yourself and what, oh, sorry, technical. Is it? It's on? Just talk into it.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. So Mitchell, what happened in November of 2021?
So yeah, November of 2021, I was on my way home from dialysis treatment at Abbotsford Regional Hospital, heading home to Chilliwack, when a torrential downpour started to occur, making it extremely difficult for me to get home. After getting home, we found out that due to the mass amount of raining, the Nooksack River had overflowed and the dike gave away, causing the entire Fraser Valley to flood.
That must have been pretty, wow. So, I mean, like, I just can imagine. So I have a few questions, if you wouldn't mind sharing, because I think, you know, we have a diverse group in here, but as kidney professionals, what can we do to keep you and our patients safe, and what would you need? So I'm just, what was the most worried, first of all, what worried you the most about, your dialysis treatment or what was happening?
So definitely the most worrying thing first was with my family and everything. We were worried if we were going to have to be evacuated, how we were going to get groceries, just all the general essentials to life. And then later we found out that the highways were closed. We started to instantly panic about how I was supposed to get to my dialysis treatment the next day. We didn't know how we were supposed to get there. We thought maybe we could ask someone to take a boat.
Oh. So yeah, you were, your family obviously was the number one concern, and then dialysis for sure. Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
After finding out that the roads were closed, we were worried how we were going to get there.
No, for sure. Did you feel prepared for an emergency? Did you know what you needed to do as a dialysis patient?
I felt prepared in the short term, but I wouldn't necessarily say the long term. I had an emergency dialysis kit with me, and I knew about my normal diet. I didn't really necessarily know about the emergency diet that I was supposed to be on. And for who to call, I would have assumed to call my nurse, but if I wouldn't get in contact with her, I would have assumed to just call 911.
As a hemo patient, did you know who your nurse would have been to call, or would have you just called the unit?
I did have a registered nurse at the time.
Okay.
So probably to call her.
Yeah. You mentioned a dialysis emergency kit.
Yeah, so
What
I
was
had
that?
I had my emergency dialysis kit, and it contained a little bit of K-exolate, which was a powdered-like substance that you would mix with water, and it would lower your potassium levels for you.
Yeah. Did you have to use it?
I didn't have to use it at the time because we ended up getting called into the Chilliwack airport and getting helicoptered into Abbotsford for treatment, and I made it just in time for my treatment.
Wow. I can't even imagine what you went through. Do you ever remember anyone sitting down before the emergency to talk about emergency preparedness, to help you become prepared? Do you ever remember that happening in the unit?
If I did, I can't recall it to this day.
No. No, fair. Well, you had a lot happen, but of course, yeah. So, as a chemo patient at the time, what do you think we could do as healthcare professionals to help support our patients, knowing that we have very diverse patients, we have frail patients, some patients have a hard time with English. Is there something we could do to prepare?
I would say just to do more training on everyone, kind of give a little more instruction manuals, maybe have more pictures of what that be, kind of have a little more, just instructions on how to take your K-Xylate powder, how to know what your emergency dialysis would be, know what your emergency diet would be and all that, and just who to call for in emergency scenarios.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you want to add about your lived experience? Because, I'm sure there was some lessons learned that may have happened.
Yeah, I definitely learned that I was not nearly as prepared as I should have been. I should have had a designated bag put away that I would have had about a week's supply of medication for me, my emergency dialysis kit, a clean change of clothes. Yeah. A little bit of food for the emergency diet as well would have been helpful.
So in the end, you ended up staying with your family in Abbotsford during the floods until the roads were open again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Renal Health, they offered us hotels, but I didn't need one. I luckily had my grandparents that they lived only a block away from the hospital, and they were more than happy to house me.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Thank you. Thanks, Mitchell. I'm now going to ask Naomi a few questions from a healthcare professional's lens. So Naomi, it must have been hard when this happened and you're thinking, is my family safe? Are my patients safe? Am I safe? What am I supposed to do? So can you tell us a little bit about what distressed you the most and what happened on that day?
To be honest, I don't particularly remember feeling super distressed because I was in from a family perspective, because where I was living, we didn't have any concerns with the flood. I could get around in our local area. But coming to work, I think we just worked on identifying who might be affected geographically by washed out roads for access to healthcare and access to supply delivery, because I was working in peritoneal dialysis at that time. So then from there we worked on identifying who might be in greater need of acute care. For example, those who might not be as stable or have a PD catheter but hadn't been trained yet. Or those who had just been trained and were starting to manage the PD at home. We had a patient who lived in Hope, and she was near her scheduled delivery, so she was short on supplies. And so she needed some more. Eventually, we did have supplies delivered to her by helicopter, but that was actually quite a feat. It took a lot of extra work. It wasn't my work. I wasn't organizing that, but the rest of the team was organizing that. Anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Those were kind of some of the things.
How did you pivot your care at that time for your patients, knowing that it's probably things had changed?
So yeah, like I was saying, we identified some acute needs that of patients who couldn't access us because the roads were washed out. So from there, to avoid people becoming acute and to avoid a backlog of training, because that's also a concern. If we're putting off this training, then all of a sudden we're going to have like 5-6 patients to train at once, and we don't have the capacity room-wise or staff-wise to do that. So we needed to look at a way to do that differently. So one of them was Heather, who isn't able to be here today. I trained her over Zoom. This wouldn't necessarily have been ideal for every patient, but for her, she was really savvy with technology and was able to pick up things quite quickly. So I was just able to get her, she already had her supplies at home, so I was able to get her set up and running with at least the basics. And then once we did realize that there were some back roads available for essential workers, we arranged for myself to travel out to Chilliwack. And I stayed there for a week, did some more training of patients who were there, and was able to then go visit some patients who had some concerns and maybe swap some supplies around for people, which is normally not our practice to share supplies around with patients. But at that point in time, we were looking at emergency situations. We also had a casual nurse out there too, who lived in Chilliwack. And so she was able to, prior to me going out there, she was able to go see a few patients.
One thing about emergency management is sometimes it's just safe practice, not best practice. So when you mentioned we had to share supplies and whatnot, we wanted to keep our patients safe. And so sometimes in disasters, that's what we have to pivot to. So thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else you want to share about your experience to help people know, as you know, and I mentioned, the next one might be coming. We don't know when, but how can we be prepared? Any final messages?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I recognized was just working together as a team. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their part to play. I didn't think of all the possible scenarios. I picked up on certain things. Other people picked up on other things. So bringing all those things to the table and working together as a team is super important so that you're thinking of all the aspects. And just being creative. I think that was the other thing too. We had having teamwork, everyone comes up with different ideas. Mm-hmm. And so you can build on those ideas and really support each other so that we can help the people that we're caring for.
Thank you both for sharing your story. I'm glad that's behind us and you're up here to share that with us. Thank you. Yeah. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the supports we have in British Columbia if there is an emergency. Really what I'm going to talk, if we have a large-scale emergency, we do have a lot of support in place. And some of you may know this and some of you may not, but I think I'd just like to refresh your memory if you do. So we have regional or hospital EOCs, which is our Emergency Operating Center. So all of you work in a health authority, so there will be one in your region. Maybe it's just in your hospital. It could be a regional one. It depends on the scale of the emergency. We also have HEM-BC. You may have heard that word. That's the Health Emergency Management of BC. And they specialize in emergency management for our healthcare, for our patients and our staff. And then here at BC Renal, we also have an emergency management committee to support you. There is some more support. If we need even broader support, we do have a provincial health services or health emergency coordinated center. It's called the HEC. The acronym, I don't know. Anyway, it's called the HEC, and they will come in if we need federal support, if we need the reserves, if we need those types of things, which you've probably already witnessed in some of your units. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about your EOCs. Every hospital has a regional EOC, and this is what you will be sort of under the direction of in an emergency. The EOC is working with you, your staff, and your patients, and they're working to make sure that we have timely communications, that decisions are made quickly, issues are resolved, and that we have the resources we need. The EOC follows an ICS structure, which is called Incident Command. This is very similar to any emergency structures, so our fire, our police, our reserves. Even when we had the Olympics, we had a whole ICS structure in case something went sideways. They follow this structure and it works really well when we have to pivot to emergency. And it might be in a physical location, it may be a remote location, or working virtually. This is an incident command sort of structure. I'm not gonna, it's very sort of complex, but if you think about renal, we're working in a renal unit, it's called operations. So we fit into the operations section of an incident command. Renal fits into that so that we can keep the lights on, we can keep the operations going, and we feed all that information up to the incident commander, and the incident commander will kind of navigate everything. You can see here, renal does fit in along with the other operations of a hospital. So we really want to make sure, we're working really hard to have a table at the EOC, because I think a lot of our emergency planning people, and it has shifted, so think that renal is ambulatory, we can just cancel, we'll just send them home, but they don't understand the chronicity, and our patients need life support. They need it 3 times a week. So we've really shifted that needle, which is great. We're having a seat at this table. We are advocating for our patients, and we can't just shut the doors and say, sorry, we're closed today. So HEMBC it's a PHSA program. People don't realize that. It's actually a PHSA program, but there are HEMBC reps in all of your health authorities. So there is a HEMBC rep to help, or reps, plural, to help you in an emergency, and they will really help you organize. So if you ever have to get supplies to a patient who, the roads are washed out, HEMBC can leverage those resources. We can get helicopters. We can, they will organize all of that on our behalf. So please be aware that this is a resource in your hospital or in your region. And they work with all different partners. They can work with our vendors. They can really help promote that. This is a photo of our mobile hospital, which is a legacy of actually the Olympics. It's a hospital that they can put in a parking lot and run a full hospital. Well, it's not full, it's only 12 stations, but you can run, something in there if you needed to. So we also have access to that if we do need it. And then there's the BC Renal Emergency Management Committee, and that is province-wide membership. We have people from around the province on this membership. We're trying to be prepared. We know things are going to happen. We can't always know what's going to happen, but if we can be as prepared as possible, it will help with our downtime, and we can move forward, and we can make sure our patients are safe. We also would bring together, if there's an emergency, like if one hospital needs support, we can bring together what we call an emergency task group. And that brings us all together, and we can support each other. As I mentioned, we're resilient, we support each other, we're connected, and that's something we can do at BC Renal quite quickly. As far as our patients, we want to make sure that they have the right information, and I'm sure you've seen many of these resources in your unit. We have our emergency preparedness booklet. We have sort of our pack and go kit. Staying Cool is a newer resource that we brought out after the heat dome. This middle one I want to really highlight. It's a patient wallet card, and you're probably thinking, well, so what? Well, it's got the patient's emergency diet on it. It tells the responder that the patient might have a dialysis access. And as of late, we added this: patient must be prioritized for transport. So for instance, if there's the muster site, or the Red Cross is helping get patients out, they will know that we need to prioritize our dialysis patients to get out. So this is just something that they can go to those sites and say, I need to get out to get my dialysis. So we want to make sure our patients know that that is there, and that they can advocate for themselves if no one's there to help with that. We also have a video that you can certainly share with patients, and I do think some units are playing that during Emergency Preparedness Week. Speaking of Emergency Preparedness Week, we've marked on the calendar, not week, month, I'm sorry, that was wrong, month. We've marked on the calendar when we're going to do all of our promotional, educate our patients, make sure that they are aware of the emergency diet and the KX-late that Mitchell spoke about. And we have it in May so that it's a reminder not to forget about this important thing. We try to make it fun because as my presentation's a bit sad and depressing, we try to make emergency preparedness fun. So we have some games, we have some prizes, we get patients engaged. And here's a few photos of our patients who won some emergency kits. So thank you to all of you for doing that work. We're really happy. We need you. We don't have the reach at BC Renal, so we need you to take that and talk to your patients and really move that forward. So thanks to all of you. We do have an emergency management plan, so we will be more prepared. We know where to go, where our resources are. So we do have an emergency management plan. As of the pandemic, a small group of us came together and we created an allocation framework. If you remember the early days of the pandemic, it was new. No one knew what was happening. We didn't know if we'd have a huge surge of patients. There was so much uncertainty that we needed to be prepared if we had this mass amount of patients come in. How would we allocate our resources when we already are at full capacity with our chronic patients? How do we manage our acute patients as well? And how do we manage those resources? So that was something that came together, and it is published and peer-reviewed, and so a lot of great work. We can now pivot that maybe to remove COVID-19 pandemic. It still is applicable in mass casualty or some sort of emergency, so we can still pivot and use it. But what we did realize, and all of you are aware of this, that in the pandemic, it wasn't a high surge of patients that was the issue. It was staffing emergencies. And you probably all felt this. Our nurses were getting sick, our staff were getting sick. We were realizing we didn't have those resources. So what we've done is we've created some staffing resources to support all of you. If you remember back in the pandemic, they were closing down ambulatory units, they were canceling surgeries, they were doing things, and then they were redeploying nurses to units where they needed them. So we've created some guides to help with that. If a non-trained dialysis nurse came into our unit, at least we would know how to support them. They could help out, they could be there in an emergency. We also recognize that many of you also are working under contingency operations on the best of days. You're often short-staffed. So these guides can certainly help you if you have to move to a crisis operations. These are the two documents I talked about. One is helping in the hemodialysis unit. This could be for anybody, even some of our clinic staff, our PD staff, our transplant staff who may get redisplaced into the hemo unit where our patients have to come in 3 times a week. So there's that document to support. And then this is a template of a business continuity plan. If you know what a business continuity plan is, it means keeping the lights on and keeping continuity of care, keeping everything moving. And so you can look at in this one document with the nurse with the mask on, it talks about what each discipline what are essential streams, like you have to do this, and what can be put off in an emergency to maybe do when the emergency or the crisis is over. So that might be something you want to look at before the emergency, just saying, because you don't want to be figuring out what is essential during an emergency. So these are documents that are available to you. Adira mentioned this yesterday, but we are so excited to share the news of our hemodialysis emergency support team. We know that most of our patients and our staff are with our hemodialysis patients because those are our largest groups. We now have a group of nurses who will be helping us in an emergency. So if one unit or one region is short and we need nurses to go to that region, it is so much nicer to have the nurse go there than having to decant patients, bring them in, find a home or find a hotel room for them, So we now have this wonderful team of nurses, and it's just launching as of pretty much now. We were hoping to have it done by the fire season this past year, but we are going to be going live by the end of this month. Just as a reminder, this is how many dialysis units we have in our province. So there is going to be a time that one will need support. We have 29 community units and 13 in-center units. So we need to be prepared to support those. And I would just love to introduce our new HEST hemodialysis emergency support team. Some of them are in the room. Yay! So we are just thrilled. I don't know if you want to stand up and wave. No? Yeah. Hello? Yes. Woo! Way to go, Naomi. You're one too. So we're thrilled to have you guys. Thank you so much for signing up and being committed to supporting all of us. All of these nurses have a vast amount of experience and knowledge, and will be able to pivot in an emergency, and we'll be doing some work to training our nurses. So we're just thrilled. So thank you. I want to also highlight the importance of our Promise modules, and thank you to Promise for working so hard on making sure we have emergency management modules. Promise is the only system that talks to one another. We know we have Cerner and Meditech and all those, but in an emergency, not all the hospitals or programs use Cerner and Meditech. Promise is the one that speaks to everything. So Promise is so important, and we have a whole emergency management module which tells you where your patients are located. It will tell you where their address is, because sometimes there is an emergency in their area. We also have a home hemo and PD map, so you can look on the map to see where your patients are located. This is just so important for those visuals, snapshots, especially in our wildfires where they just move so quickly. We need to be able to locate those patients. And this slide is really important. This tells us what our capacity is. We know that many of you have capacity, but you also have a little bit of room. Everybody has some room, in a true emergency, we would be able to see what our capacity is, what your patient numbers are, what machines you have available, so that we can move quickly. If we had to do everything and phone everyone and do a spreadsheet and figure all of that out, that's going to take days. But if you can keep this up to date, in an emergency, we can grab that information and we can move resources. We have that ability. We can move patients if we had to. We can figure it out way quicker than if this information wasn't available to us. So thank you again to our Promise team who have put many resources into developing this. I'd highly encourage you to take a look. Yes. Oh. So thank you. So please take a look. Our HEST nurses will also be working on keeping data up to date and looking at this. So this has been a lot of work. We've brought all this together. Now, in order to make sure it works, we have to evaluate it. And we don't really want to evaluate it in a true emergency. We don't want to find out the gaps. So we did a tabletop exercise in the fall. In September, we brought a lot of your leadership together, and we had an emergency. We actually we had a mock earthquake. And so we had to figure out how we were going to support our patients, how many patients we had, where our higher acuity patients, what their potassium levels were. We had to figure all this out. And it was still a fairly stressful environment, even though it wasn't a real emergency. So we all came together, you can see, and then we had breakout rooms because we are all in different regions. We're all in different areas. So we had one room where interior health was and one room where VGH. So we all went into a separate room, and we kind of communicated that way by Zoom. It was the best way to sort of simulate the different health regions. And so there were a lot of gaps. There were a lot of great lessons learned. I think it was a great experience. the lessons learned was PROMIS is the only EMR that can be used provincially in an emergency. So I really want to highlight that PROMIS was our saving grace. We were able to, in real time, figure out where patients were, where our capacity was, where we could really make sure our patients could get care. Here's a key tip. In an emergency, you don't want to find out your password's expired. So keep your password. You know when you get, your password's going to expire in 10 days. Don't ignore it. Okay? Make sure you update your password, because Murphy's Law, you are going to not have your password in an emergency. And then you would be calling the support team. So that will really save time. Keep your emergency or your password up to date. Don't rely on memory. You're going to be panicking. You're going to be like, I have to get this quick. Don't rely on memory. Know your emergency management plan in your renal program. Know where it is. Blow off the dust. Open it up. Read it. Most of it's probably online. I hope it's not dusty and under a bunch of other binders. But know it. Know what your plan is. Know where your resources are. And then identify key people in your health authority. So know, who am I going to escalate an emergency to? Who do I know are going to be able to get the resource? Know who those key people are, because you don't have time in an emergency to look. So know who those people are. So these were some key lessons learned. So I'd just like to call you all to action. I'd like you, as I mentioned, know your emergency management plan, educate your patients, and discuss what their emergency management plan is. Get to know who's going to support you in your health authority. Ensure your PROMIS modules and passwords are up to date, and review your plan on a routine basis. So I would just ask that you go back to your units and make sure that you are all prepared. I would like to thank, this has been definitely a group effort, and thank you to everyone that's been involved in making sure that we are prepared. We have been working on this for since COVID. So we are in a much better place, I can say, than we were when the pandemic hit. And it's just wonderful that we've all come together. So to not leave you sad, remember, resilient is the capacity of being interconnected to cope with an event and recover successfully. We are interconnected. We are here for each other. That's what I love about Renal. That's what I love about our network. We are always here to help. So thank you. I guess there's a few minutes for Slido questions. Are there any?
Yep, there are a couple of Slido questions here. So one of them is, the first one here is there a way to use technology, for example, an app like Alertable, or an automatic email or text when a disaster happens?
That's a great question. So I mentioned in our slide, we have an emergency task group, and that's a group of people like your leadership, your medical directors, who will come together in an emergency and then be able to sort of filter down that information to our frontline staff. So we are now using something called Signal because, for those Android users, it's really hard when you're on an Apple text. And no, I'm just joking. Signal is one that can talk to everybody. So we have a Signal app, and we're doing that. As far as bringing that knowledge to everybody, I think it's up to your leadership to filter that knowledge down to you, because we also know in an emergency, you're going to be getting messages from your hospital. You're going to be getting it from your region. You're going to be getting, who's the source of truth, right? So we want it to be filtered through your leadership to let you know what is the most important step at that time. So you will be bombarded with info during an emergency, so we're trying to keep it as simple as possible so that we're not all,
Okay. Another question was, what did you learn for this emergency? So I'm assuming the one, either the tabletop exercise, or if we're referring to the flood, that you would incorporate in routine care, and then in brackets like training on Zoom. I'm going to say what I learned from my experience with the flooding was just making sure that Promise information is updated, that you have accurate addresses in Promise for patients so that you know where they're living and what patients are going to be geographically affected. I think just, again, and reflecting on what Mitchell said, making sure you are educating your patients about what to do in an emergency, making that part of your routine care.
What about you, Mitchell? What could healthcare professionals do on a routine basis? Do you know? Or can...
Yeah, I'd probably just add on the same thing on just doing routine training, maybe just kind of out of the blue, doing a little exercise. Disaster happens, what would you do? Yeah, just probably that would be a good one.
Yeah.
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 Perfect.
And there is one more question here that has a couple of people asking it. Where can we find the published article on balancing needs of acute and maintenance dialysis patients?
Wow. That is also, it's on our BC Renal website, but it is also on the journal. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. CJSON, thank you. That's where it was published in CJSON. So you could definitely go to that website, but it is on our BC Renal website in the emergency management section of our website. So, in the publications, yes, in the publication section. Thank you, Adira. Yeah.
Do we have time for another question?
One more? Okay.
Okay. Okay. So, Adira was just clarifying that question of hybrid training people on Zoom to also reduce our carbon footprint of people traveling in. As a clinician, I would say that would be doable in some respects. I think it's really, sometimes it's, from my experience, in-person training is always way better than over a video. You can do a much better assessment. And I think that's what we found out too with COVID and the restrictions and doing clinics, a lot of them virtually in our PD unit. We would try to kind of alternate a bit. And in some cases it worked well. In some cases, situations were left too long that we weren't able to identify in doing a visual assessment or an in-person assessment, and then it caused acute issues later. So I think you'd have to be selective on who you would do that with. Did that answer the question? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, still one more? Okay.
Okay. So is there a way that the HD disaster kit can be widely available to each HD patient, maybe rather than the patient creating their own kit, which may not happen? Do you have an answer for that one, Sarah? I don't.
I think that would be a little tricky because everyone in their home has different needs. They may have a pet, they may have reading glasses, they may have babies. So an emergency kit would really be up to the individual at home. There is and for the pharmacists in the room, I hope I'm getting this right, but you can get a 2-week emergency medication if you need that. But I think that would have to really be on the individual, and it would be really challenging to know everyone's needs. So great question, and I'd love to see that, but I don't know if we'd have the resources to do that. Oh yes, thank Andrea, the pharmacist. Please. All right, here's the medication clarification.
So in terms of providing K-Exolate to all patients in case of emergency, it was kind of a nightmare because we have so many patients, plus these things expire. And so we would have to, like you say, treat everybody on an individual basis, whereas like for Seashell CDU, they specifically requested that. So I entered all the orders and it was dispensed to the patients, but we couldn't do that. We don't have the resources, and it's actually wasted resources for everybody. And also when I see my patients to do a regular med review, I remind them to always have at least 1 week extra supply of meds, because you can't always have 2 weeks because the drugs also expire.
Yeah.
So just re-educating the patient to say, don't wait until you run out of pills in order. Always have that week extra in case of emergency. And also it gives the community pharmacies extra time to refill before they totally run out.
Perfect.
So that was my comment.
No, great. Thank you for clarifying. That's a great reminder. Well, thank you, everyone. Is there housekeeping we need to do? That's a great. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your conference.